Welcome, friends, to Franchising Stronger Together. I'm your host, Red Boswell, president of the International Franchise Professionals Group, IFPG. We are joined today by great friend Darrell Johnson. Darrell's the CEO of FranData. If you don't know who FranData is, you need to know. Excited about his insights on the industry, where we are, where we've been, and most importantly, where we are going. He has a very unique perspective, and Darrell, we're honored to have you today. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to do so, Red. Thank you.
Now, first, you are in, I know you live up near DC in Northern Virginia, but you were sharing with me that you are down in beautiful Charlotte, North Carolina. How are you and the family doing?
Well, we're doing fine. It's actually Charleston, South Carolina. But
what did I say?
Charlotte, North Carolina.
We have an event coming up in Charlotte, and I'm already thinking Charlotte. Thank you. Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah, and yes. Close, but not quite the same.
Exactly. And you and your wife are there. Do you have anyone else with you? Are you all safe and healthy?
Everyone's doing fine, but yes, thank you for asking. We're doing fine here.
Fantastic. Well, a beautiful window in your background there.
Well, thank you.
So as we start, help the listeners, mostly franchisors and franchise professionals, help them understand who is FranData. What do you do?
FranData is the primary research and advisory firm in franchising. We're a company that has been around for over 30 years. We do research and advisory work with franchisors. We do research and advisory work for suppliers. And for the lending community, we are a rating agency. We risk rate franchise systems for the lender community.
Well, I got to know you more than anything from the Franchise Leadership and Development Conference. I see you every year at IFA, of course, but your presentation and your team's presentation at FLDCon in Atlanta is just a highlight. It is so fascinating, it's so insightful. You guys have just a unique perspective in the world of franchising, from risk assessment to trends. Could you, normally I'm asking a franchisor, how are you impacted? How did you respond? In your case, you've got a much more macro view of things. So I'll embarrass myself if I ask a question incorrectly. So what can you share? How can you help franchisors out there understand? We know what's happened for the most part. What is happening now, and where do you see things going?
Let's put franchising in context of industry areas, because it's hard to generalize. The franchise business model is an opportunistic model. It'll go where the opportunity is. And in an environment like this, where a lot of industries have been really crushed by the crisis, other industries have thrived. And you'll see franchising migrate on the development side to where the opportunities are. Obviously, a brand can't migrate from what the industry they're serving, but we'll see new brands showing up. We'll see a fair amount of growth, and are seeing a fair amount of growth in sectors of the economy that one would expect are doing well. You and I were talking for a few minutes just before we started the broadcast. Industries that, if we put this in maybe into four groupings, the retail food industry has had a real mixed bag. The inside dining, obviously, any brand that's involved in that has really been hit very, very hard. A lot of QSRs have not only bounced back from the physical closing of locations and are now starting to reopen, but some of them are doing, the ones that have been able to stay open at the unit level are doing phenomenally well. In some QSRs, same-store sales are up from where they were a year ago at this time, which is a pretty amazing feat given how dramatically the economy overall has collapsed.
And this is by taking advantage of takeout and delivery?
Well, takeout and delivery, yes, is the primary driver behind those. What's happened is not every brand, even in the QSR, a very competitive space, has been able to do that. So the ones that have actually gained market share from a customer base that was previously going to either rival competitors in that same genre or even across different subsectors. So the ones that have been able to solve the connection to the consumer in an environment like this have done actually quite well. So that's the food side. The non-food retail has been by far the hardest hit of any of the four categories that I'm about to explain. And the non-food retail lacks, by and large, the ability to engage with the customer. If you're not physically coming into the fitness center, to the massage studio, to the location specific need, it's really hard to deliver that product or service, and that the non-food retail has been disproportionately impacted by that. A few have solved for it in different ways, but by and large, that whole area of franchising has been pretty dramatically hit, and that includes the whole hospitality industry. It includes a lot of different industries that are retail facing. The residential services side of franchising, which cuts across a number of different sectors, but all of them primarily focused in one way or another at the residential market, have done quite well. Some of them early on were basically locked out. If there were a cleaning service, they weren't sending people into somebody's home to clean it anymore. But now with the protocols in place that many of them have had, and certainly all of the residential services that take place outside the living space itself, they've done quite well. People staying home notice that their windows are not clean. They notice that painting may be a good idea, upgrading the home, changing the landscaping. A lot of the things that have been just sort of a normal cycle have been accelerated because people are now spending more time in those locations. So residential services has been very strong. And then the B2B has been a mixed bag. Everything outside those three groupings has been a mixed bag, and that's kind of where we are today, is that as we start to gradually climb out of this, you've got those four groupings, and they're starting from different points. The residential services is starting from a very strong position. Some of the food is starting from a pretty strong position where they've actually gained market share because of their ability to get connected to the customer. And the other two have been very mixed. It really has depended upon the particular product or service that they're offering and how much they've been able to stay connected. It's one thing to say, well, we can do this, but we can do it remotely, or we can deliver it in a different way. But by and large, many of them have found that just simply doesn't work, and that's made for some challenging positions for some brands, while other brands have shown not only a capacity to get through this, but have actually grown through it and are continuing to grow, not only on same-store sales, but on business development side.
Well, Darrell, you and your team have such insights. I love Edith. She's wonderful. When you're not able to be there, she just knocks it out of the park. And so in planning, for franchisors listening, looking into the future, there's such a mixed bag, as you described it, of variances between how they're doing today. What about that future? You don't have, no one has a crystal ball, but you've got as close as I've seen, and you're always very real in your predictions. You're not the over optimist as I tend to be. You're not the contrarian negative view, but you give a very fact-based predictions. Where do you see lending and the overall business environment going over the next, let's say, 6 months?
Well, let me speak. Well, over the next 6 months, let me put that aside for a moment and come back to that point. I think the broadest advice that I can give to a franchisor right now, regardless of what sector they're in and how they're doing right now, is to be introspective on whether consumer behavior has changed. I don't think what we have, let me say it a different way. I do think that in a lot of ways, how consumers act in the future has been altered based on what we have gone through. And I say that not because of the fear or the socialization, but simply we have trained consumers in a different way over the last 6 months, and likely for the next 6 months, because until a vaccine is available, we're going to be dealing with this in maybe a rolling fashion, but we're still going to be dealing with this for many, many months to come. If that's the case, consumer behavior itself is being altered. I've now found ways of solving for purchasing behavior and social behavior and consumption behavior because I've been forced to. But now I've become accustomed to certain ways that behavior has changed my way of thinking. And it's that consideration that I would strongly encourage franchisors to be very thoughtful about as they look at what are we going to do next year, and as we start to plan for the post-recovery phase of this. Is our products and services aligned with the way consumers are likely to behave, and are we at risk because of the way consumers have been acting through this that may carry over when it's passed? And that's a very important and fundamental long-term question that I think franchisors need to be very thoughtful about. And it may lead to things, for instance, like, well, maybe we don't, our physical offering in the future is going to be configured differently. Maybe the pattern of mobility of getting it to you as opposed to you coming, yeah, there's a social behavior characteristic, but maybe that's wrapped around a different set of products and services than it was before. Maybe whether it's just retail in general or even home related services, B2B, there's a change in behavior that we've created that may be long lasting after we get past the crisis and say, okay, now it's business as normal. It may not be, but for reasons of the way we've educated consumers differently through this. And it was forced on us, all of us. But that is going to have, I think, a lingering impact on how consumers behave in the future in many ways. In other ways, it may go back exactly the way it was. But I think we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful about that, because it may change the configuration of the offering. It may change if we have a retail facility, it may change how what kind of facility we have. We may have a long-term, much more of a, if I'm in food, maybe this whole ghost kitchen idea that's arisen that creates home delivery. Yeah, maybe that's going to be there for a much longer period, and maybe the social behavior is wrapped differently in the future than it is currently. So, having said that, for the long term,
during this crisis, so many times I've had interviews, and we would joke about the new normal. It's not normal. It's not new. It's not. I mean, it's not going to maintain. It's not going to be the new normal. But you know what? What you're saying is so true. We will never have, 99% of everyone you met, you'd shake their hand. 2 years from now, when this is in the distant past, it's never going to be 99% of people shaking hands anymore. There are some people that will never shake hands again. And that is a new normal that we're going to have to deal with. It's very frustrating, but that's the fact of life. We've created some very significant fears because of this, and legitimately so. But we have to, like you said, the franchisors, the business owners, the entrepreneurs out there need to look at these and realize what's going to stay. How can I let my people work from home forever? Because they are sure loving it right now, and many of them won't want to come back. That those type of topics are here to stay. So I interrupted you. looking into the future?
You asked about the next 6 months, and I think here's what the next 6 months is going to unfold. We're going to have the constant threat of an outbreak. We're going to have rolling outbreaks. We're going to have starts and stops everywhere. You asked about lending side of it. The key for the lending community, and we've been working with them very closely over the last 6 months to help them understand what's going on and them help us understand. The key to it for a lender today is not just about what the brand has done, what the unit economics look like, whether this borrower that I'm about to create is somebody that I want to make a 5 or 10-year bet on. The key to it now is, how did this franchisor navigate through this crisis? And I say franchisor, there's a greater emphasis today from the lending community standpoint on what kind of support and what kind of adjustments has the franchisor made, and how is that going to help this brand new prospect, given the impact that the whole sector that this brand is as a part of has been impacted. Maybe in residential services, they look at it and say, well, gee, they've actually done better, so I'm not going to worry a whole lot about whether the franchisor is going to step up their support program or do something that's going to keep them distracted with some of the underperforming units for a longer period of time, when my new borrower is going to need new attention and can't physically go and get connected to that regional manager. There's all these issues that, if you look at it from a lending standpoint, they're system-wide, and that system-wide measure lands at the doorstep of the franchisor. What we have asked franchisors to do, because we know absolutely it will be necessary and needed, is to start giving us information about what their units have done, how they've performed through this, how many that they think they're ultimately going to close, because lenders don't like surprises. And it may not be that lender has a single loan with that brand, but they want to know what the landscape is going to look like 6 months from now if they're going to make a loan today. Part of the challenge that we have is that we have a growing prospect pool, as you and I were discussing before we started this, with people being laid off, people looking for alternative ways of building their career. And that's always good for franchising. That creates a bigger prospect pool, and that's happening again. And that's really good. But if you don't have the capital supporting it, you're not going to get that franchisee underway. And lenders today are saying, yeah, I know that in the case of FranData that brand has a fund score. I know what the risk profile of that brand is historically. Now I need to know, what did they do during this period? And more importantly, if I'm starting my brand new borrower off in this brand, what kind of support and how is that support changing over the next year or two? That's the information we're asking franchisors to give us, because if we can get ahead of that with lenders when the question comes up, help them understand how this brand is positioned to actually support that new prospect coming in, and help the lender get to yes with a loan that is absolutely necessary and a part of the development process.
So I'm hearing now more than ever, for franchisors, validation matters. What every buyer moving forward is going to ask the other franchisees as they go through the discovery process, what did the franchisor do? How did they help you? How did they pivot? How did they support you? How did they rally the troops to build the brand and strengthen the brand? And if nothing else, protect you and the brand. Both the buyers, the new franchise candidates want to know that, but especially now more than ever, those lenders out there want to have a good handle on how you reacted and how you responded to that.
That's right. There's a broader question that lenders are trying to understand, and that is, on a relative basis, has that brand navigated through this in a stronger way? And if I'm a lender, I'm not making a loan to the entire brand. I'm making a loan to one borrower who is a new franchisee or at starting a new unit. what I care about as a lender is whether the support is going to be there and whether the backup systems are going to be properly in place so that this new borrower, franchisee, is going to actually get off the ground and get through that critical period of growth, which from a lending standpoint is about 3 years long. The vast majority of riskiness in a loan for a lender in franchising is within that first 36 to at most 48, depending upon the sector, but it's within that 36-month window typically. And it's during that time, if that borrower has a hiccup, I need to know now how this franchisor is positioned to handle it. And the rules have changed because the franchisor can't put somebody on a plane to fly out to where that location is and say, we're going to take care of you for the next 3 days and figure this out together. All of this is now different. The rules have changed, and yet the need is exactly the same from a lending standpoint. And that's over the next 6 months, lenders will be making choices. I made loans to this brand for the last 5 years. I may not want to do that again in the next 6 to 12 months if I can't see a full picture of how they got through this and what they have done and what they're likely to do in order to support my borrower who's going to get through a very rough period over the next 3 years, typically in a weaker economy.
You know, I remember probably multiple times at Franchise Leadership and Development Conference. Now, this year, Franchise Leadership and Growth Conference, how you shared, it was enlightening to me that you say the lenders, they're looking at the buyer, certainly the buyer's history. They're looking at the franchisor, but they're not so much looking at the economic climate and the risk in the first 12 months, I think you had said, because it's really rare that default happens then. It's 18 months. That number really stuck out to me. And you shared 18 to 36, even 48. But that 18-month magic number has always stayed in my head ever since I heard you say it 1 or 2, 3, 4 years ago. Because that's when the pain catches up with them. If they don't have a good model, if they aren't well funded, if they're not following the system properly, 18 to 24 months is where it really starts. You can't hide it any longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any advice? You've given some great advice for franchisors. Anything else you might want to share or shed light on, or best practices moving forward? I know I'm throwing the most broad questions at you, but anything else that would be of value you could share to franchisors as they plan the future?
Well, we're in a period now where if I'm a franchisor, I have to have my operational act together because the rules are changing. I'm responsible as a franchisor for 10 or 11 functional areas: supporting franchisees, compliance, development, training, all of those typical things. But some of those, the rules have changed in terms of how I can actually deliver properly and execute properly for those functions. From a franchisor standpoint, knowing what is the best way to do this now, how do I take advantage of what is out there today that I can use that's different than what we were doing a year or 2 or 3 years ago, is really important if they're going to get back on the growth train of bringing new units into play. I mentioned the longer term thought around making sure that the customer that they had a year ago is going to be the same customer that they're going to have a year or 2 from now. And my guess is, in most cases, it isn't. It's a different type of customer. So how are they adapting their model to what they think that customer is going to look like a year or 2 down the road? Beyond that, those functional areas, how the franchisor executes on those is also changing. The IFA has done a tremendous job of navigating through the legislative and the kind of the political morass that has led to the PPP program and the exclusions they got for different industries that have a heavy concentration of franchising. They're currently looking at ones now around the maybe getting some tax support for learning management systems that many franchisors simply can't afford the upfront cost to put in place. You mentioned, well, discovery days. I mean, you got to do that through a Zoom call now, except it doesn't work as well. And so how do you create a learning management system, of which there are technologies out there that are designed to do, and around employee training the same way? How do you do that from a remote standpoint and still end up with the same product, with the same result? Well, that costs money. And it's those are the types of functional changes that we're advising franchisors on today, that we're cognizant of how those are evolving. And from FranData's perspective, some of these are moving rather dramatically. It's not just, well, now my discovery day, I'm going to use a Zoom call. You're making judgments as a franchisor about that prospect, and you're doing it now through a Zoom call? Wait a minute, that's not quite the same thing as being in person and having spent a few days with somebody and getting a really good feeling for what they're like. And how do you do that now with the world having changed? You still have to do it. And you can't just say, well, we'll make do and we'll just use a Zoom call, because you're not able to make the same judgments. How does that change? What are the protocols that lead to the same outcome, but are now forced into a different set of rules? That's what we're advising franchisors on today. And I would, as advice to franchisors, as you start to ramp up the development side again, you need to be very thoughtful in how you're solving those, because it's not just if you think you're just applying this, and it goes all the way to the other end of compliance. If you think you're applying it using the same rules that you used before, you're not going to end up with the same outcome. So it's important to pay attention to those things.
You know, I'm hearing adapting the model, pivoting is a word we hear often, a changing outcome. Franchisors got to be alert and agile. We hear that a lot. Your model at its core remains the same, but how that model goes out into the market, how that model markets itself, how that model recruits new franchisees, how that model might even deliver their product or charge for their product. All those, you're seeing some adaptations in the marketplace depending on the category. And Darrell, we sure appreciate what you, Edith, and your whole FranData team does for the industry. And certainly measuring and monitoring the risk factors of franchisors is so unique. I bet you 3/4 of the franchisors listening right now didn't even realize something like this existed. You know, so
I'm pretty sure most of the lending community would answer that differently. Yeah, but we know that kind of credit risk modeling is out there, and it's important. I mean, lenders use FICO scores to determine your personal or my personal credit worthiness, and we've applied that same kind of fundamental logic to franchising generally, and it's used pretty actively, and will be more so in this period. Yeah, the two things I would leave you with, Red. One is, we can say pivoting and adaptability and all of those things. And to me, those are just kind of the current buzzwords that we're using to describe something more fundamental. And that fundamental thing that we're trying to describe is make a conscious decision that the consumer that you were serving a year ago is going to look like the consumer you're going to be serving in a year or two from now. And if you're consciously saying, yeah, it's the same that we did before and our products and services are the same, then go like hell to get there. But be cognizant that consumer behavior has changed. And some of that, not all of it, but some of it is likely to be long-term, as your handshake example is a good, valid way of thinking of it. And the other point that I would leave with is that the franchisors across every sector, every industry, have the same responsibilities. But how they execute those responsibilities has changed. Training development process, those things are absolutely have been forced into change. They require an investment, but also a conscious decision on the part of franchisors to say, what we are doing now will get us to the same place that what we did before allowed us to get to. Making judgments about prospects, getting them properly prepared to launch their new business, and then to oversee them, advise them, work with them long term, and make sure they're following the rules properly. Those processes may be the same 2 years from now, but I'm strongly suspecting some of them won't be. And it's making sure that you're consciously understanding how those things are evolving and changing so that you can actually run your system and grow your system very smartly.
You heard it. Darrell Johnson, CEO of FranData. Darrell, thank you so much for joining us. This is good stuff. I can't wait to see you on the road.
I think we all look forward to that for sure, Red. It's great talking to you. Thank you for having me on. Look forward to future conversations with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.